No, they're limiting. Oh my god, dude. We're doing limits. Are you fucking serious, dude? Dragon Ball Fusion World just got its first ban list. And it's a doozy. Everyone, it's Espira here, and it is currently 4 in the morning, so I'm not trying to be too loud about it. But we finally got the June 20th ban list announced during the Bandai Card Game Fest conference, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, the show where they talk about their plans for the upcoming sets as we lead into the end of year. With all the different Bandai games, and Fusion World was the last one, and honestly we got so many news. Not only did we get news about the ban list, what exactly is going to be on it, but also we got things as far as black reveals, and we got things like changes to the game, and even more announcements beyond that. So that'll be in its own separate video, so you guys are definitely going to want to check in later today. I'll be posting it right after this one. But as far as the ban list goes, let's jump into it. Of course, TopKu was a #1 target. We all knew that the deck was going to be hit somehow, but what was it going to be? Was it going to be the leader? Was it going to be Kefla? Was it going to be Roshi? Was it going to be Ribrianne? Was it going to be Glimmer? And then on top of that, if they do hit red, what happens with the meta after that? And I am very spooked with the fact that green potentially poised itself to be extremely strong. And are they going to recognize that and do something about it? Well, we finally got the answers. And while it's a very decisive blow, it's a whole thing. So looking at this here, Kefla will be limited to 1. And you guys already know, I absolutely hate limits. I just don't like the high roll nature of like, oh no, you saw your high roll card. But this isn't that kind of card. It's not as impactful. And I will say the limit to 1 makes a little bit more sense when you consider that Kefla can be recycled with Glimpse. So the fact that that's something that gets a recurring engine, which means the deck's not completely dead, it still has some really nice lines that you can do with Kefla. And at least other red decks do have access to a Kefla. But I'll say the fact that she's limited to 1 is a big blow to the deck. And then bans on top of that, we're getting Roshi banned and Ribrianne banned. And the Roshi ban kind of sucks, but honestly kind of makes sense for just how efficient it is at being a self-awakening tool. Ribrianne though, I think just makes sense, right? I think a lot of people are like, well, she's not so busted because she does nothing on her own. But the fact that for 1 energy, if your opponent goes on to 2 life, you can hand check them is something that's incredibly powerful. The fact that, you know, I can power that up with a bunch of glimpses, and I don't have to tell you guys how that goes. We've all been experiencing it for essentially the last month since the release of TopKu, since the release of set 2. The fact that she's getting banned makes a lot of sense to me. They really did not want to hit the leader. We could have honestly avoided many of these changes if they decided to hit the leader. I guess it's just easier for them to go about this way. But now the question becomes, how do we get our refunds, right? Like, Kefla is an SR, Ribrianne is a rare. And while that might not matter to a bunch of people, there are people who did end up crafting these cards or pulled for these cards. How will that translate over to the digital? Unfortunately, I don't understand Japanese enough to know how they did it. They had a big long talk about how they were going to do the implementations over in the start, but we're just going to have to wait for further translations before we understand that piece specifically. Honestly, my hope is that you return people a wild card of that rarity. So if they have 3 Keflas, you should probably give them 3 SRs because you don't know which ones they crafted, which one they didn't craft. Honestly, if they give us SR Dust as opposed to the full SR wildcard, I'm going to be super miffed. The enforcement's for July 1st, so it's not going to get there before this weekend's regional. I think everyone expected that. But for all the different regionals after that, we'll be able to see the changes as well as in digital. I can't remember if they said all the changes were going to be implemented on July 11th or if just the ban list was going to be implemented on July 1st. But nevertheless, that's going to happen. So now the question becomes, now that TopKu is, I mean, unequivocally a dead deck. It lost its double striker, it lost its ability to Kefla. You can play it, but I don't necessarily think it's as good. What does the meta look like? And actually, I kind of already discussed this over on my Patreon. So if you guys want the early scoop onto what my opinions for these kinds of things are, they're going to be right there. Now, it's not that I knew what the ban list was, but I knew that TopKu was going to be hit in some fashion. So on top of providing my set 2 tier list ahead of time, I also went in and discussed what a tier list would look like for post. So here is a little sneak peek for you guys who aren't in the Patreon, but links to that will be down below if you are interested. This is going to be my look as to what the meta is, right? We weren't sure what was going to happen to TopKu. Unequivocally, I think the dead might as well be dead. It's probably a D tier deck. Maybe it's a fine C tier deck because the red cards are still strong. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, its relevance in the meta are so far diminished that it won't really matter anymore. So how do I think this plays out? Well, first off, the other red boogeyman deck, Beerus, I think is significantly worse. So here it is. I have him in C tier. 1, I think Beerus was only as good as he was specifically because he was the other red deck that can kind of play alongside TopKu. no matter what happened to TopKu, if he was no longer top of meta, I actually think Beerus gets worse anyways. Maybe B tier, but like maybe in consideration for C tier. But now the fact that we also lose Kefla means that the deck loses its pushing power that it had before. I mean, essentially the deck was a TopKu deck just with a different leader. So the fact that it also lost the tool of being able to push out boards with Kefla means that it is a significantly worse deck, especially when you consider that without TopKu around, green becomes the scariest color on the block. The fact that it now gains that extra turn or two of pressure that it needed to be able to get into the late game, especially when you consider the fact that they are changing the rules to allow the first player to draw, which means that extra card, if you're stuck going first, allows you to be able to breathe a little bit more, makes a huge difference. So as far as I see it, Beerus will go down in play quite a lot, especially since he's actually hurt a lot by the ban list. Then green rises up. And I've been saying for a long time that green only really needed one turn. The meta was just one turn too quick for it to really get its legs under it. So now green will shift over to being likely the best color in the game, with blue still being there to contend, because blue is actually still capable of playing a game. Xeno loops are really annoying, and you have the capacity to be able to apply a lot of pressure with peel-off loops, as well as things like Vegeta just being a really good swing attacker. That said, I will say that the green matchup won't go so well for blue, since now green is allowed to run more Brolys. They can run more greedy because the meta isn't as fast, because they can breathe a little bit, and now you're still under pressure of back-to-back Brolys, and then if ever they feel in danger, then they can sell you and be in a comfy position after that. And then androids, as far as being the mid-range body, are incredibly great at applying pressure, being able to establish boards, and just having energy up for defenses that can ramp them, that can draw them additional cards. Very, very solid. I still think Zamasu is kind of in the A tier. In my opinion, Zamasu hasn't never really been the best blue leader, but like I understand that he's got some results to kind of back up that he's fine. But I personally think losing out on the draw and the utility that you get from the other blue leaders probably means that he's not as good. But nevertheless, I think blue, green are the definitive best colors at the moment. You could make an argument that Gohan goes up to maybe B tier, but he still has a lot of the weaknesses that I feel like he had before. And then in that range, I think yellow gets a bit of a boost. I don't think yellow is in an amazing position, but I do think it does get better. And realistically, I think I did yellow a little too dirty. With the fact that green is so incredibly strong, you still have the fact that 3-cost Vegeta is an incredibly strong tool that prevents them from being able to play. So if I had to make any changes from this list that I made like 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point, I guess I would shift up yellow a little bit more. Maybe we bring up Vegeta and Frieza over to the B and A tiers. Maybe these are supposed to be together. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really delved into what those builds would look like, but at the end of the day, yellow should definitely be better. So, you know, take this with a grain of salt that this was something that was made a while ago without all the context in the world as to what this was going to look like. But if you guys had to get my early guess as to what the meta will be, it's that this will be a very green and blue dominant meta, with yellow being able to get in there whenever it can match up against green and hopefully not lose out against blue, because the blue matchup is still terrible. It is an insanely wild day for Dragon Ball. Got our first ban list, which was well warranted, but we also got so many changes. So if you guys want to know everything that was announced, whether it comes from Black, what Bardock does, the rules changes, and a brand new game mode in digital, then you guys definitely want to check out the channel. That will be going up very shortly after this one. But now we've got a new meta coming. We've got changes to the game, making it so much more easy to dive into. And I think this is going to be a very exciting next couple of months for Dragon Ball Fusion World. Catch you guys on the next one.